Hey guys, tonight we step into the gentle glow of a fire that has burned for longer than memory itself. Imagine it. You're in a darkened stone house, the kind with creaking beams and clay jars lined against the wall, and in the center, always the center, there's a hearth. The flames flicker low, sending up the faintest trail of smoke. The air smells of ash, bread dough, and something herbal left to dry too close to the fire. It's cozy, it's steady, and at the heart of it all sits Hestia, the goddess of the hearth, who, unlike her more dramatic siblings, never charged into battle or turned into a swan for questionable reasons. She just stayed home. And honestly, you probably wouldn't survive this life. No smartphones, no pizza delivery, and the only Netflix is staring at embers until they look like constellations. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know where you're tuning in from. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle closer to the fire, noticing how the shadows seem to lean in with you, as though the whole room revolves around this flame. For the Greeks, this wasn't just a practical fire to cook your lentil stew. This was Hestia herself. Every spark, every flicker of warmth was a reminder that the goddess was present. Historians remind us that the hearth was considered the symbolic center of family life, where meals were shared and oaths were sworn. And yet, there's something odd about it too. Unlike Zeus, who insisted on thunderbolt fanfare, or Aphrodite, who made an art of stealing the spotlight, Hestia preferred to remain unnoticed. She was a god you forgot to thank, until your stew boiled over. The quirky tidbit? Some ancient households had a habit of sweeping crumbs straight into the fire as a kind of offering. Picture yourself brushing last night's burnt barley into the flames, whispering sleepy, "There you go, Hestia, enjoy." That was dinner cleanup and worship rolled into one efficient move. Honestly, that's multitasking at its finest. And as you sit here, you realize her stillness was her strength. While other gods were busy transforming into golden showers or hosting wine-fueled chaos, Hestia was there, holding the fire steady. Historians still argue whether her quiet role was intentional. Did the Greeks deliberately downplay her to keep the focus on rowdier deities, or was she simply so essential that no one thought to embellish her story? Either way, she's like the Wi-Fi router of Olympus, unseen, unglamorous, but the whole household falls apart if she goes missing. The hearth in front of you crackles gently. You lean back, lulled by its rhythm, thinking how every Greek home, from peasant hut to grand villa, kept this flame alive. And the thought comes to you, maybe it wasn't about spectacle. Maybe Hestia's gift was in the unremarkable, the steady glow that made all other stories possible. You're still sitting by that fire, warm and a little drowsy, when the air seems to shift. The hearth, steady and calm, suddenly feels like the eye of a storm. Beyond its circle of light lies a family so dramatic that any modern reality show would bow out to the competition. Welcome to the Olympians, Hestia's brothers and sisters, loud, quarrelsome, and perpetually dramatic. And right there, nestled among all this chaos, Hestia just keeps poking the embers, like the quiet one at Thanksgiving dinner who refuses to join the family argument. Her parents, Cronus and Rhea. You might recall the cheerful family tradition here. Cronus, paranoid about losing his throne, swallowed each of his children at birth. Real parenting goals, right? So Hestia spent the early part of her existence in the dark belly of her dad. That's one way to guarantee no teen rebellion. Swallow them whole before they can slam a bedroom door. Eventually, though, Zeus, the youngest sibling, overthrew Cronus and rescued everyone. And out they tumbled, a full set of Olympian siblings, Poseidon with his trident, Hades with his underworld real estate, Hera plotting marital vendettas, Demeter dreaming of grain harvests, and in the middle, Hestia. The fascinating fact here, Hestia was technically the first child swallowed and the last one to come back out. Ancient writers sometimes use that to explain her paradoxical role, both the eldest and the youngest. Imagine being told at family reunions, you're the oldest, but also, somehow, the baby. It's like being expected to cut the turkey and sit at the kids' table simultaneously. Now, while Zeus claimed the throne with a flair for thunder and Hera perfected the art of disapproving side-eye, Hestia chose stillness. She didn't take sides in squabbles. Poseidon wanted dominion over the seas. Athena wanted Athens. Apollo wanted music competitions. Everyone jockeyed for power, while Hestia basically said, "I'm good, thanks. I'll just keep the kettle on." And here's a quirky tidbit you might not expect. In some stories, Hestia literally gave up a seat on Olympus. There were 12 chairs around a divine table, and when Dionysus came along later, bringing wine and hangovers, there wasn't enough room. Rather than cause a scene, Hestia ceded her spot. She stepped back, not because she was weak, but because she didn't crave the drama. That's like someone giving up their seat on a crowded bus, but actually being glad to stand. Yet historians still argue whether she truly vanished from the Olympian dozen, or whether her absence was more symbolic. Was she always there, in every fire, even if she wasn't front and center on Mount Olympus? Or did Greek poets quietly replace her with Dionysus, preferring to sing about wine rather than warm porridge? It's one of those scholarly debates that may never end, because, honestly, Hestia herself wasn't about ending anything. She was about keeping it going. You glance back at the hearth. Imagine trying to host one of those Olympian dinners, Zeus bragging, Poseidon pounding the table with his trident, Hera muttering insults, Apollo tuning his lyre far too loudly, and then Hestia, calm, steady, passing bread, refilling cups, reminding everyone not to burn the stew. She is the glue of the family, the one who never storms off or throws lightning bolts. And as the fire flickers, you realize something. For all their shouting and fighting, even gods needed somewhere to come home to. Hestia made sure the home was still there, waiting, warm, and undramatic. The flames are softer now, lower, the kind of glow that makes you lean in and listen more carefully. You watch as Hestia, calm as ever, sets aside her wooden ladle and looks around at her noisy brothers. There's Poseidon, sulking because Athens didn't pick him over Athena. There's Apollo, already humming the opening bars of yet another lyre competition. And somewhere nearby, Hermes is probably inventing wallets just so he can pickpocket them. In the middle of all this clamor, you hear Hestia say something rare, a vow, a promise. She chooses maidenhood. You hear her voice, quiet but firm, promising never to marry, never to wander away, never to let herself be pulled into the chaos of Olympus romances. And let's be honest, can you blame her? Greek mythology is basically a soap opera where everyone cheats on everyone else, and half the cast ends up as swans, bulls, or suspiciously friendly clouds. By staying single, Hestia dodges so much drama. It's like refusing to join the group chat that keeps exploding at 3 a.m. The historical fact here is fascinating. Unlike many other Olympians, Hestia wasn't defined by epic adventures or complicated love affairs. Instead, she was honored for her vow of chastity. Ancient Greek households saw her as a guardian of stability, her maidenhood representing purity and unbroken devotion to the flame. That's a radical idea in a pantheon where gods were judged by how loudly they could stir up chaos. And the quirky tidbit? In some myths, both Poseidon and Apollo actually proposed to Hestia. Picture that. One god promising her dominion over the seas, the other serenading her with golden notes, both trying to win her hand. Hestia, with all the grace of someone who knows exactly what she wants, politely says no thanks to both. Instead, she asks Zeus for eternal maidenhood, and gets it. Imagine being so done with dating that you negotiate celibacy as a divine perk package. That's commitment. Historians still argue whether this vow was purely mythic symbolism or if it reflected a real cultic practice, a kind of model for priestesses who also lived in chastity. Some scholars suggest Hestia's virginity emphasized her role as an untouched flame, ever pure, ever steady. Others think it was simply a narrative device to keep her out of the tangled Olympian romances, a literary way of saying, don't expect juicy scandals here. Move along. You glance again at the hearth, and the fire seems to wink back, as though it knows a secret. By choosing stillness, Hestia wasn't rejecting life. She was choosing a different kind of power. The power of being unshakable, the flame that doesn't wander, the warmth that doesn't vanish when the mood shifts. And honestly, in a family where even Hera couldn't keep her marriage under control, Hestia's vow might have been the wisest decision of all. So here she sits, serene, watching the sparks rise, while Apollo polishes his lyre and Poseidon sulks about wave patterns. You lean closer to the flame, realizing that sometimes the bravest thing isn't chasing glory or thrones. It's knowing when to say no and mean it. The fire pops softly, a little spark leaping upward before fading into the shadows above. You're drawn deeper into the warmth now, into the rhythm of Hestia's world, where tending the flame isn't just housekeeping, it's holy work. Imagine her crouched by the hearth, adding another log, smoothing the ashes, coaxing embers so they never quite die. To you, it might look like ordinary maintenance, the ancient equivalent of someone fussing with a thermostat. But to the Greeks, every flicker was sacred. This wasn't just about dinner prep. Hestia's flame was a heartbeat of the home, and more than that, it was a bridge between the mortal and the divine. In temples, too, her fire burned, unbroken, unextinguished, watched by attendants who had one job: keep the flame alive. You can picture them, sleepy-eyed but devoted, nudging coals through the night while the city slumbered. And no pressure, but letting the sacred flame go out? That was a disaster-level mistake. Like crashing the Wi-Fi in a house full of teenagers. The historical fact here is striking. Many Greek cities maintained a central hearth in the Prytaneum, the town hall, where Hestia's sacred flame burned. When colonies were founded, settlers carried a portion of that fire with them to ignite new hearths abroad, a glowing symbol of continuity and shared identity. Imagine rowing across the sea with nothing but a sputtering torch to start a whole new life. Talk about carry-on luggage. Here's your quirky tidbit. Some accounts suggest that if the flame did go out, it could only be rekindled in special ways, often by friction from rubbing wood, never by casually striking a spark. The idea was that it had to be pure, like hitting the reset button on sacred energy. You, sitting here by the fire, might chuckle at the thought, all this ceremony, just to light what looks like a very stubborn campfire. And of course, historians still argue whether Hestia herself was imagined as literally inhabiting these flames, or if she was more symbol of them. Was she the goddess present in every hearth, invisibly seated by the fire? Or was she simply the concept of the hearth personified, honored more as an idea than as a tangible presence? The ambiguity lingers, like smoke you can't quite pin down. You lean in and picture a family gathered around such a fire, whispering prayers before meals, dropping small offerings, bits of bread, a drizzle of wine, into the coals. The fire doesn't roar, it doesn't demand attention. It glows quietly, steady and patient, just like Hestia herself. In a pantheon full of tempests, she is a constant ember. And you realize, while Zeus thundered and Poseidon stormed, Hestia's gift was far simpler but no less powerful. She kept the fire alive, both literally and metaphorically, ensuring that homes, temples, and cities never fell cold or dark. It's the sort of job nobody brags about, but without it, everything collapses. The glow of the hearth deepens, and as you stretch out on the floor, you notice something curious. Every Greek house, no matter how grand or humble, is built around this fire. Not a corner, not shoved against the back wall, always the center. The architecture itself whispers, this is where life happens. You see the walls bend inward toward the hearth, rooms spiraling like spokes around a wheel, all pointing back to Hestia. Imagine walking into one of those homes. There's no foyer with shoes tossed about, no living room with mismatched throw pillows. Instead, you step straight into warmth, a glowing circle where stew bubbles in a clay pot and children sit cross-legged, listening to stories. Even pets, scrawny dogs or curious cats, curl up by the coals. And you're placed right in the middle, because a fire is everyone's meeting place. The historical fact here is clear. The Greek word Hestia itself means both hearth and goddess. It wasn't just her name, it was the very concept of home. That double meaning shows how deeply entwined she was with daily life. Every time someone said the word, they weren't sure if they meant the fireplace or the deity. Honestly, that's like naming your Wi-Fi router god of connectivity. It blurs the line between sacred and practical. Here's a quirky tidbit for you. In some villages, when a new home was built, families didn't just light a match and call it good. They often borrowed flame from a neighbor's hearth to kindle their own. Imagine awkwardly knocking on your neighbor's door, not for sugar or flour, but with a clay pot in hand, politely asking, "Could I borrow some fire, please?" And then carefully carrying it home, hoping you don't trip over a goat on the way. And yet, historians still argue whether every single household truly treated the hearth as a religious site, or that level of devotion was more urban, tied to temple practices. Was Hestia honored equally in a shepherd hut high in the hills, where the hearth was mostly about staying alive on a freezing night? Or was her worship more formal, tied to ritual words and priestly oversight in bigger cities? The debate lingers, glowing like embers that refuse to go out. You lean closer, watching a family gathered around their central flame. The father breaks bread, crumbling a piece into the fire first. The mother ladles stew, pausing to murmur a quick prayer. Children giggle, half paying attention, until the fire pops loudly and they all fall silent for a moment, reminded that this warmth isn't just wood and ash. It's presence. It's continuity. It's Hestia. And as you think about it, the hearth really was the original social media platform. News was shared here. Songs were taught here. Arguments started and resolved here. Births, marriages, and even quiet farewells all circle back to this space. No notifications, no pop-up ads, just a steady flicker of light uniting people across time. The fire settles into a steady rhythm, almost like it's breathing. You lean in closer, curious now about how people honored Hestia outside the home. Surely she had temples as grand as Zeus's or Athena's, right? Marble columns, gold statues, priests in elaborate robes? Well, surprise. Hestia didn't do temples the way the other Olympians did. She preferred something simpler. No colossal statues, no intimidating stone giants glaring down at you. Instead, her shrines were flames themselves, plain, ever-burning, quietly tended. Picture yourself wandering into a small sanctuary in the heart of a city. You expect to see sculpted gods with dramatic poses, the kind you've seen on postcards. Instead, in Hestia's space, you find a modest hearth. A circle of stone, glowing embers, smoke curling lazily upward. That's it. No glitz, no thunderbolts carved in marble, no winged sandals hanging on the wall. Just fire. And yet, you feel watched, seen not by a figure, but by the warmth itself. The historical fact is that Hestia was one of the very few Olympians who almost never received large-scale temples or grand statues. While Athena towered over Athens with her Parthenon, and Zeus had sanctuaries brimming with gold and ivory, Hestia was represented by her element, the hearth. Every temple, no matter which god it honored, often included a small fire for her. She was everywhere, woven in, never demanding her own spotlight, like the friend who always brings snacks to the party but never posts about it online. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some shrines to Hestia were literally portable braziers. Imagine carrying your goddess around in a little metal bowl of glowing coals, trying not to sneeze too hard. If Hermes was a god of travel, Hestia was like the travel-sized comfort kit, fire in a cup, warmth on the go. Historians still argue whether this absence of temples was a sign of her being overlooked or, paradoxically, of her being too important for one fixed place. Was Hestia too sacred to be confined? Or was she so integrated into daily ritual that nobody thought to give her a palace of stone? The scholarly debates smolder like her flames, never quite going out. You crouch by one of these hearths, maybe in the corner of a bustling agora. Around you, merchants shout, sandals scuff, donkeys bray. But here at Hestia's fire, it's quiet. People step up, offer a pinch of grain or a drizzle of oil, murmur a prayer. Then they move on, back into the noise. It's not a spectacle, it's a pause, a reminder that the goddess doesn't need grandeur. She lives in steadiness, in continuity, in the embers glowing low but never extinguished. And as you watch, you realize how rare this is. Gods usually demand attention, sacrifices, processions, festivals. But Hestia, she lets her fire speak for her. It's like she's whispering, "You don't need to see me. You already feel me." You lean back, soothed by the thought that sometimes the quietest spaces are the holiest ones. The hearth before you flares gently, as though reminding you that fire isn't only for families gathered at home. It is also for strangers, wanderers, and guests who find themselves knocking on an unfamiliar door. In Greece, the concept of xene, hospitality, was sacred, and Hestia sat right at its core. You picture yourself, a weary traveler, dust on your sandals, cloak frayed at the edges, stepping up to a doorway in some little village. Before anyone offers you bread or water, the first thing you notice is a hearth inside. And by that flame, you already know you're welcome. The historical fact here is that hospitality in ancient Greece wasn't just courtesy, it was law. Zeus himself was called Zeus Zenes, the protector of guests, but Hestia made that welcome tangible. The first sip of wine poured, the first bite of food shared, the first seat by the fire, all were given under her gaze. To refuse hospitality was to risk offending both Zeus and Hestia, and nobody wanted to anger two gods at once. Think of it like an ancient 5-star rating system. Nice hearth, warm stew, no divine curses, would recommend. And the quirky tidbit? In some accounts, hosts place a guest's hands briefly over the fire as a symbolic act, showing that the newcomer was under the protection of Hestia's flame. Don't worry, it wasn't a painful ritual, more like hovering your hands near a space heater. Still, imagine the awkwardness if your host forgot to warn you first. Welcome, traveler. Just put your hands near this burning log. Trust me. Historians still argue whether every household followed strict rituals for guests or if this was more idealized storytelling. Was every farmer in Thessaly truly offering elaborate welcomes, or was that more of a poet's dream of how things should be? Scholars suggest the truth probably lay somewhere in between. Some households were genuinely warm and generous, while others just handed you bread and hoped you'd leave before dinner. You settle into the scene, watching how Hestia's flame made every stranger part of the circle. A guest might arrive tense, suspicious, uncertain if they belonged, but one glimpse of that fire softened the room. Bread broken together, wine poured from the same jug, laughter shared as the embers glowed. The hearth turned strangers into almost family, if only for a night. And you realize hospitality wasn't just about feeding the hungry or housing the weary. It was about extending the flame of your home outward, making sure no one walked away cold. Hestia's gift wasn't just warmth for you. It was warmth meant to be shared. You glance again at the fire. It flickers in quiet agreement, reminding you that kindness doesn't need a parade. Sometimes all it takes is moving over, pouring an extra cup, and making room by the hearth. The flame glows softer now, and you find yourself drifting from doorways and guest tables into the spaces where people planned, debated, and swore oaths. Hestia wasn't only the quiet presence in kitchens, she was also the steady flame burning in public halls and temples. You imagine stepping into a Prytanean, the council house of a Greek city-state, where leaders gather to argue about laws, taxes, or whether that neighbor city needed a sternly worded letter, or maybe a war. At the very center of the chamber stood the sacred fire of Hestia, never allowed to go out. Here's a historical fact. Every Greek polis kept such a flame in its official building, and it symbolized the life of the city itself. If the fire died, it wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a disaster, like a town's power grid suddenly failing. Only, instead of calling an electrician, you had to organize a whole ritual to rekindle Hestia's flame, often by borrowing fire from another city. Yes, the original borrow a cup of sugar from a neighbor's, but significantly more dramatic. The quirky tidbit? When colonies were founded overseas, settlers carried embers from their mother city's hearth to light the new one. Picture it, a clay pot glowing faintly in a ship's hold, carefully tended across choppy seas, seasickness, and perhaps one too many arguments over who forgot to pack the olives. When they arrived, that little ember wasn't just fire, it was identity, continuity, the promise that we are still us, even here. Like bringing along your Wi-Fi password when you move, except instead of Netflix access, you get divine legitimacy. Historians still argue whether these sacred fires were kept literally burning 24 hours a day in every city, or if the ritual was more symbolic. Some suggest there may have been shifts of attendants constantly tending the flame, while others believe the fire could be rekindled each morning with a ritual and still count as eternal. Either way, the idea was simple. As long as Hestia's fire burned, the city had life, unity, and order. You lean closer to the scene, noticing how even the fiercest debates calm when someone gestured toward the hearth. Imagine two politicians, red-faced and shouting, suddenly lowering their voices because, well, you can't bicker quite so viciously under Hestia's watch. Her flame reminded everyone that whatever quarrels they had, they were still part of the same shared fire. And so, the hearth wasn't just domestic, it was civic. It tied homes to households, households to cities, and cities to colonies far away. Every spark traced back to Hestia, binding a whole culture together. You sit back, letting the glow surround you, and realize that Hestia wasn't the goddess of staying put. She was a goddess who made staying put meaningful. Without her, a home was just walls, and a city was just stone. With her, both became alive, warm, and worth belonging to. The glow of the civic hearth fades behind you, and you wander into the quiet space of temples and shrines. Hestia never demanded grand statues, marble colonnades, or golden thrones the way other Olympians did. Her presence was subtler, woven into every ritual. In fact, she often had the first and last portion of sacrifices, always, without exception. It was like being the first person served at dinner, but politely never leaving the table until everyone else had finished. The historical fact here is clear. Every Greek sacrifice began and ended with offerings to Hestia. Before Zeus got his thunderous share or Athena her wise portion, the priests always tipped a little wine into the flames for Hestia. Even the simplest libation, just a splash of oil or honey, began with her. This wasn't because she was needy. It was because she was the axis, the steady center around which all other gods circled. Without her, the ritual had no frame. The quirky tidbit? Unlike other deities who inspired lively festivals with floats, parades, and too much wine, Hestia rarely got noisy celebrations. No all-night parties, no musicians straining their lyres, no mass processions. Her festival was everyday life. Scholars sometimes compare her to that one relative who doesn't crave the spotlight but whose absence would leave the family reunion awkwardly incomplete. Imagine a holiday where the most sacred act is quietly lighting a lamp and remembering, yes, someone kept the fire going. Honestly, it's the most introvert-friendly religion perk you could imagine. Historians still argue whether Hestia ever had a fully developed priesthood, like Athena in Athens or Demeter at Eleusis. Some inscriptions mention priestesses. Others suggest that duties were merged with local household practices. The debate lingers. Was she formally institutionalized, or was her very informality the point? After all, maybe her worship worked best because it dissolved into daily life, impossible to separate from the rhythms of eating, gathering, and resting. In temples, you'd notice that Hestia's fire burned quietly alongside the more flamboyant gods. No towering statues, no winged creatures carved into pediments. Just flame, steady, warm, flickering in silence. If you had wandered into one of these temples, you might have thought, this is it? Just a fire. But then you'd realize that was the whole point. The fire was life, and life didn't need marble grandeur to prove itself. The rituals reinforced this idea. Pouring the first sip of wine into the fire wasn't about show. It was about continuity. You can picture the crackle, the brief flare of flame, and maybe someone whispering a word of thanks. It's the kind of religion that feels more like breathing than kneeling. So, as you sit beside that sacred fire, you feel what ancient Greeks must have felt. Hestia's worship wasn't separate from their world. It was their world. A constant rhythm, a ritual so familiar it dissolved into the background, like the hum of your refrigerator at night. You don't notice it until it stops, and then you suddenly realize you can't live without it. The sacred flames flicker, and now you find yourself drifting away from temples into the domain of stories, those tales whispered around firesides when night grew long and imagination stretched beyond reason. Myths of Hestia are rare, but the ones that survive are telling. You might think of her as a goddess who never chased drama, but drama had a way of chasing her. Here's a mainstream historical fact. In the ancient texts, Hestia is often mentioned for what she refused. Unlike her siblings, she had no wild adventures or scandalous romances. Zeus once granted her the privilege of remaining a virgin forever, untouched by the entanglements of marriage or passion. In fact, she swore an oath on his throne to remain chaste, and he honored it by making her the guardian of the hearth. That's a pretty neat career path. I'd rather not date. Thanks. How about you make me the cosmic symbol of stability instead? The quirky tidbit comes in the form of her rejected suitors. Both Poseidon, lord of the seas, and Apollo, master of light and music, asked for her hand. Hestia politely declined both offers, essentially inventing a divine version of thanks, but I'm focusing on me right now. The Greeks loved this detail. It painted her as wise enough to sidestep conflict, while everyone else stumbled into messy soap operas. Imagine a Thanksgiving dinner where two brothers argue over who gets the turkey leg, and the sister simply says, "Actually, I'm vegetarian," and everyone just stops mid-fight. Historians still argue whether Hestia's lack of mythic adventures diminished her role in literature, or whether it elevated her. Some say her quietness made her peripheral, easily overlooked in epics and plays. Others argue that her refusal to participate in scandal was the very reason she symbolized stability. She was a stillness anchoring a storm of gods who couldn't seem to behave. The debate continues, because silence can be both a weakness and a strength, depending on how you frame it. Picture the scene. Apollo strums a love song on his lyre, Poseidon slams his trident impatiently into the ground, and Hestia just smiles faintly, pours another drop of oil into the fire, and carries on. No fuss, no rivalry. By not stepping into the fray, she holds more power than either suitor. She doesn't need to be chosen, because she's already the center everyone orbits. And in this way, the myths remind you of her nature. She isn't about spectacle. She's about endurance. Her stories are short, quiet, sometimes only a line or two in Homer or Hesiod. But like a spark glowing at the edge of your vision, once you notice her, you realize she was always there, shaping the rhythm of divine and mortal life. So, as you lean back into the warmth of the mythic hearth, you begin to see the pattern. Sometimes the most powerful stories are the ones where nothing happens. Because the nothing is everything, the steady breath, the enduring flame, the calm center where all else turns chaotic. The myths fade like embers, and now you follow the flame into the more practical world of daily rituals, those quiet habits that shape Greek households from sunrise to bedtime. You see a woman rising early, long before anyone else, tending the coals of the family hearth. She places new wood, blows gently until sparks leap, and murmurs a short prayer to Hestia. This wasn't ceremony for show. It was survival. Without fire, there was no breakfast, no warmth, no light. Here's a historical fact. In nearly every Greek household, the first offering of the day went to Hestia. A pinch of barley, a splash of wine, even a little honey was set aside before meals began. The family believed that by honoring her first, she would bless the food, protect the home, and keep quarrels to a minimum. Though anyone who has witnessed siblings argue over bread crust knows that even divine help has limits. The quirky tidbit? Archaeologists have found curious little altars, sometimes nothing more than clay bowls or carved stones, tucked into kitchens and courtyards. They weren't elaborate. In fact, they were almost humble, looking a bit like a makeshift candle holder. It's a reminder that Hestia's worship didn't require grandeur. She was perfectly content with a cracked pot as her altar, as long as the fire inside it kept burning. Imagine inviting Apollo into your home and saying, "Sorry, no temple, but we do have this slightly lopsided bowl." Somehow, Hestia never minded. Historians still argue whether these domestic rituals were performed mostly by women, or if men shared the duties. Some sources emphasize the role of the lady of the house, while others suggest the patriarch led sacrifices at family gatherings. The debate mirrors a larger question of how gender roles intersected with religion. Was Hestia a women's goddess because she guarded the hearth, or was she universal because every human needed fire? The lack of detailed records keeps the question deliciously open. You watch as the family gathers for their evening meal. Before anyone digs in, a few drops of wine sizzle as they hit the hearth. There's a soft crackle, a brief puff of smoke, and then the first bite may be taken. Children sneak glances at the flame, half afraid, half comforted. The hearth is the anchor of the household, the invisible boundary between chaos and order. And when guests arrive, the moment they cross the threshold, the host sprinkles wine into the fire again. Hestia wasn't just about family, she was about hospitality. You couldn't welcome someone properly without acknowledging her. Think of her as the original guest Wi-Fi password, a ritual that says, "You're included now, part of our circle." Without it, the dinner would feel incomplete. So, as you picture yourself in that small, smoky room, surrounded by chatter, bread, and laughter, you realize how seamlessly Hestia slipped into daily life. She was a spark in the hearth, the glow in the center, the quiet rhythm of togetherness. Not flashy, not loud, but always there, reminding you that every bite, every sip, every welcome began and ended with her. The warm scent of burning wood drifts around you, and now you find yourself in the hushed spaces of philosophical debate, where scholars and poets sit, scratching on wax tablets, quietly pondering the world. Hestia often emerges here, not with thunder or tempest, but as a symbol. Some philosophers suggest that she represented the earth itself, solid, nurturing, always ready to support life. You can almost hear the murmurs. Perhaps Hestia is not just fire, but the very ground beneath our feet, unshakable, eternal. Here's a historical fact. Hestia was often invoked in philosophical texts, particularly in discussions about civic unity and domestic order. Her flame symbolized continuity, the link between generations, and the quiet rules that allowed a city or household to function. Without Hestia, they argued, society would lack the glue that held it together. Not exactly the flashiest argument in the room, but undeniably central to Greek thought. The quirky tidbit? Some philosophers describe Hestia as both feminine and neutral, hard to categorize, much like the flame she embodied. Imagine trying to debate someone who is everywhere and nowhere at once, who can't be pinned down, yet affects every conversation. That's Hestia in philosophical discourse, the ultimate introvert of the divine world, impossible to ignore if you actually pay attention. Historians still argue whether these philosophical mentions were genuinely reflective of her importance, or if they were rhetorical devices, symbols conveniently invoked to illustrate abstract ideas. Was she a real figure in daily thought, or more of a metaphor for harmony and domesticity? Scholars debate endlessly, the fire of discussion flickering like the hearth itself. You lean back, imagining a Greek thinker in a columned room, scratching notes while Hestia's flame burns quietly in a corner. Perhaps a student yawns, a cat dozes near the embers, and the lecturer gestures toward the hearth, emphasizing, "See, life begins and ends with Hestia's steadiness. She isn't flashy, she isn't loud, but she is persistent, eternal." And as you picture these debates winding down, you notice something comforting. Even in the grandest contemplations of ethics, politics, or metaphysics, the flame remains steady. Hestia doesn't compete. She doesn't interrupt. She merely glows, letting the world revolve around her gentle, reliable warmth. Scholars may argue, poets may embellish, politicians may quarrel, but the hearth burns on. You feel yourself relax, recognizing that in both daily life and lofty debate, Hestia's steady presence anchors everything. She is endurance personified, a reminder that power can be quiet, influence subtle, and that some of the most important forces are the ones you hardly notice, until they are gone. The embers have softened to a lazy glow, and now you find yourself walking through early mornings in a Greek household. You hear the faint scrape of wooden sandals on stone floors, the rustle of linen, the low murmur of prayers as the first light touches the walls. Every household has its rhythm, and at the center of that rhythm burns Hestia's flame. You watch as a woman gently fans a fire to life, adding kindling while whispering greetings to the goddess. Here's a historical fact. Many Greeks began their day by addressing Hestia first. A sprinkle of water, a drop of wine, even a small offering of bread was placed on the hearth before the day's labor began. It wasn't just superstition. It was a way to anchor the household in stability. Everyone, from the youngest child to the oldest matron, took part in acknowledging the goddess. This first act of devotion set the tone for the rest of the day, as though the fire itself whispered, "You are safe, and your home is whole." The quirky tidbit? Some families would blow out the incense in a circular motion over the fire to invite Hestia's blessing into the corners of the room. Imagine standing there, waving smoke like a sleepy conductor, while your cat inevitably decides it's time to leap through the ritual. Somehow, she accepted this human clumsiness without complaint. Her patience was legendary. Historians still argue whether the domestic veneration of Hestia was more important than her presence in grand temples. Did every household truly perform these rituals daily, or were there more aspirational ideals recorded in literature? Some scholars suggest that the rituals varied greatly by region, social class, and household size, while others believe that Hestia's flame functioned as a universal symbol, transcending practical adherence. You step quietly into one of these mornings, imagining the clatter of cooking implements, the scent of freshly baked bread, the distant bleating of goats. Before anyone speaks a word, the first gesture is always toward Hestia. Children might tiptoe over to the hearth, dropping a small piece of bread into the flames, learning early that safety, warmth, and community all revolve around the central flame. And when the day's labor begins, tilling fields, weaving cloth, preparing meals, the memory of that early blessing lingers. The fire is not just fire. It is a marker of continuity, a symbol of care, an assurance that the household is guided by something gentle but enduring. So as you picture yourself participating in this morning ritual, you realize that the mundane actions of daily life, The stirring of pots, the sweeping of ashes, the brief moment of prayer are themselves acts of devotion, and all the while, Hestia's presence remains unwavering, like the pulse of the earth beneath your feet, quiet but undeniably alive. The morning light fades, and now you find yourself in the quiet hours of evening, when the day's labor winds down and the hearth becomes a center of reflection. You imagine families gathering, the embers crackling gently, shadows dancing on stone walls, as laughter mingles with the soft sizzle of pot. In these moments, Hestia's presence is tangible, not in a grand display, but in the simple act of gathering around the flame. It is here, in the everyday, that her influence is most keenly felt. Here's a historical fact. Hestia's role extended beyond mere protection of the physical hearth. In many accounts, she was invoked in oaths and treaties, symbolizing integrity and constancy. When city-states formed agreements or households resolved disputes, the fire of Hestia served as witness. To break an oath before her flame was considered deeply dishonorable. Think of it as signing a contract with a divine witness, except the witness doesn't glare at you. It simply glows, patient, knowing, and silently reminding you of your word. The quirky tidbit? In some regions, small figurines of Hestia were tucked near the hearth, sometimes showing her holding a flame or gesturing toward it. These figures weren't meant for display. They were reminders to maintain balance and continuity, like an early motivational poster, whispering, "Keep your house in order, your heart in balance." Imagine glancing at a tiny goddess each evening while you stir the stew, a quiet companion for mundane tasks. Historians still argue about the degree to which Hestia's domestic presence influenced larger Greek culture. Did her quiet guardianship shape social norms, or was it primarily symbolic, a comforting narrative rather than an active societal force? Some scholars argue that her constancy modeled behavior for citizens and families, reinforcing civic and domestic stability, while others see her influence as more poetic than practical. The debate flickers, like the embers she guards. You lean back near the fire, watching children whisper to each other in hushed tones, perhaps telling stories or practicing songs. The adults share small talk, adjusting pots and sweeping ashes, all while the flame remains central, unassuming yet indispensable. Every small action resonates with Hestia's energy, each gesture a subtle acknowledgement of the goddess who never sought fame. And as the evening stretches on, you sense that Hestia's gift is not in drama, not in spectacle, but in reliability. She is a quiet guardian of life's rhythm, the pulse beneath the chaos, the soft anchor ensuring that warmth and light persist. You realize that in witnessing this ordinary scene, you have glimpsed something extraordinary, devotion embodied in steadiness, power expressed in care, and divinity realized through patience. The night deepens, and you feel the hush of the household settle around you like a soft blanket. Only the fire whispers, sending tiny sparks upward, fading quickly into darkness. You follow Hestia's presence here, in the quiet aftermath of the day. The dishes washed, the children asleep, the cats curled in the corners, the last embers glowing. She doesn't make announcements. She doesn't demand praise. She simply endures, offering warmth and continuity where chaos could have reigned. Here's a historical fact. In private and public spaces alike, Hestia's fire was never to go out. In both the household and the city, tending this eternal flame was a sacred duty. The Greeks believed that an unbroken flame ensured the prosperity and stability of the family and the polis. Imagine being entrusted with fire that must never die, one small misstep, and you risk more than embarrassment. You risk symbolic disorder. The responsibility, though simple in appearance, was profound. The quirky tidbit? In some accounts, Hestia's flame was even used in funerary rituals. A portion of the sacred fire was carried to new homes, and sometimes it accompanied the departed into burial rites. Picture a tiny ember traveling with a coffin or a family's new beginning, a divine witness quietly attending transitions, both joyful and sorrowful. Hestia's presence is subtle but constant, reminding everyone that endings and beginnings share the same warmth. Historians still argue whether the myths of Hestia's eternal fire were purely symbolic, or if they reflect actual continuous practices maintained over generations. Some sources suggest dedicated attendants monitored these flames around the clock, while others imply that daily rekindling sufficed. Regardless, the symbolism endured. She was constancy incarnate, a reminder of the importance of persistence and care in every home. You lean in closer to the glowing coals, feeling the heat brush your face. It's not dramatic, not powerful in the sense of thunder or lightning, but it is steady, calming, insistent in its gentleness. Hestia doesn't need grand gestures. She asserts influence by simply being present. You can imagine her watching over countless households, cities, and ceremonies, quietly asserting that life's continuity depends not on spectacle, but on care, patience, and attention. And now, as the household rests, you notice the subtle lessons embedded in her flame. Stability is sacred. Quiet is powerful. Commitment need not be loud. In a world full of clamor and chaos, Hestia offers a reassurance that some things endure. Even when the gods bicker and the mortals hustle, the hearth glows, patient, steady, eternal. You take a deep breath, letting the warmth and calm wash over you. The fire crackles one last time, its glow softening into a gentle warmth that fills the room without demanding attention. You feel the rhythm of the day slowing, your breathing deepening, your muscles loosening as if the flame itself is reaching out to soothe you. Hestia's presence is subtle, almost imperceptible, but it wraps around everything. The walls, the furniture, the quiet corners where shadows linger. She has been with you through every step of this story, in every flicker and whisper of the hearth. You notice the way her constancy mirrors life itself. Steady, reliable, patient. There's no rush, no urgency, no need to chase glory or recognition. Even as the world outside hums and shouts, here, near the hearth, you find sanctuary. The lessons she offers are soft yet enduring. That care is sacred, that presence matters more than spectacle, that stability is a kind of quiet heroism. You feel yourself carrying a little of that calm, imagining it extending outward from your own hearth, into your day-to-day life, into your dreams. The shadows stretch long and languid, dancing slowly across the walls. You can almost hear Hestia whispering, reminding you that small actions matter, tending the flame, greeting your loved ones, offering warmth to those in need, sharing light without seeking reward. The world may be chaotic, but here, in this space, nothing is horrid, nothing is broken. Every crackle, every sigh of the fire reassures you that continuity and care endure. And as your eyelids grow heavier, you let the fire's rhythm guide you, slow and gentle, wrapping you in the comfort of its glow. The last sparks drift upward, fading into quiet darkness, carrying with them a sense of peace. You are calm, steady, held. Hestia's flame remains, eternal and patient, and you carry a little of that warmth into your own night.